Okay, recording in progress. So, first part, we talked mostly about the theory of lighting and light and diffuse materials. So we're just going to take a quick review of the principles or qualities of light before we get started. And then we're going to talk a little bit about light intensity versus exposure. Why do I have these two controls of my light, and what's the difference? And then get into a basic light demo. We're going to demo the directional light, the point light, the spotlight, and there is one Arnold dedicated light called the AI area light. Now, all the other lights have Arnold attributes in them, which we'll be using, but they are not really considered to be true Arnold lights. They are basically Maya lights that Arnold has added attributes to control them so they are a lot more refined. Let's put it that way. All right, so talk a little bit about the principles of light again. So one thing I forgot to do was, I am recording, good. Couldn't remember whether I hit record or not. All right, good. So principles of light, as we talked about the first part of the lecture, right? First thing, light direction. Light intensity, so where, how bright, light color. Is it warm? Is it cool? Is it neutral? And then we get into this whole contrast hardness, which really I've broken down into being the shadow qualities. Are the shadows soft, which usually means soft light, big light, or sometimes a close light? Hard shadows, hard light, usually means small light, far away or distant, creates those kinds of shadows. So in order, when you are trying to work on lighting, go in this order, use it like a checklist, can't go wrong. Make sure we got everybody in here. Everybody good? Yes, good. All right. So let's talk a little bit about light intensity versus exposure. All right, so in the Arnold area light, and under some of the Arnold attributes for the other lights, you will see an exposure control. And a lot of times students get this confused with actual intensity. So exposure works on basically the power of 2, which means that each jump in exposure makes the light twice as bright. It's designed to work a lot like a camera does. Cameras have what are called f-stops. F-stop simply means it's the aperture or opening size that allows the light into the camera sensor. Now, when you open the lens bigger, it allows more light in, but you are doing it in a fixed number, which means you let twice as much light in. Or if it's too much, you close it a little bit, the aperture, and it closes and lets half the light in. Linear lighting, which really is how real world light works linearly, means there are no big jumps or steps between units. It doesn't go like a stair. It's more like a ramp, if that makes sense. If you go upstairs, you got to take a step, you're up. A step, you're up. Whereas a ramp, you can kind of creep your way up and gradually go up. Same way with lighting. Real light works in a linear fashion, meaning no large jumps. So if anybody's ever seen animation curves, you usually have steps where you put your keyframes, right? You want your character here, you go to the next step and it changes position, right? That would be like step animation or just setting your main keys or poses. Same, that would be considered to be like exposure, where if it's linear, when you hit the actual, once you make them splines or you smooth out those steps, then the character will gradually reposition into the new stage or the new pose. Same thing with lighting. So linear works more like this, where you have dark and you have light. And exposure works like this. You have these big jumps, and you don't really have small increments in between. So real world, as I mentioned, works in a linear fashion. We usually measure the intensity of light bulbs, or you go out to buy compact fluorescent, or you buy LEDs, or in the old days when you bought incandescent bulbs, you went by wattage, right? You go out buy 40-watt bulb, 60-watt bulb, 100-watt bulb, whatever it was. You wanted it to be brighter, you know you needed more wattage. Same thing when you work with light intensity. So in the real world, they use lumens to determine how bright 60 watt is. 60 watts is equal to 800 lumens. So 100 is usually something like 1200, something along those lines. Now, we don't use lumens in Maya. Actually, you can use lumens in Unreal or in Unity to add light in. They also go by what are called candelas, which is sort of like lumens, to measure intensity. But think of these lumens as kind of like your intensity. It's going to be bigger than you think. That's my whole point. So when you create a light, most of the time, the default intensity is going to be 1, way too little. Don't be afraid of cranking up the intensity into hundreds or thousands or even 10,000s if you need it. It's not that you're doing something wrong. It's that the light needs to reach that far, or it's a big scene and you need to light up a really big area. So just like the real world, 60-watt bulb, 800 lumens, that'll get you a pretty good reading light. It'll light up a room pretty decently. But you get into something like a floodlight where they start around 500 watts. You know, most typical lights that you see on a movie set are 1,500, 2,000, 10,000, 20,000. There's a lot of wattage because they are super bright and they have to do a big area. Big numbers. Higher the lumens, higher the intensity, the brighter the light is. So just get used to using intensity rather than exposure. Exposure is really good when you need to bring all the level of your lights up at once. or knock it down a little bit. It's good to do that for all the lights rather than individual lights one at a time. Does that kind of make sense? Questions? Good. Does that make sense out there in the Zoomverse? Anybody have any questions about that? So, like I said, CG light intensities can be quite big. Don't be afraid of going above 100, 1,000, even 10,000. Some lighting systems, like we used to use RenderMan, their distant light, which is equivalent to the sun, that started at 50,000, which, most people go, oh, what? Yeah, it's bright. It's meant to work sort of like the sun. Okay, so having said that, let's take a look at lighting here. Let me kind of minimize some of this Zoom stuff all over the place here. All right, so we've got directional light, behaves like the sun. Notice the parallel arrows, parallel light rays, parallel shadows. The point light. Point light is omnidirectional, shines in all directions, like a bare light bulb, for the most part, a firefly, a star, a candle. Spotlight, kind of like a point light, but it's got a cone or a funnel that the light spreads out in that direction. Kind of like flashlight, car headlights. Area light, this is considered our physical light because we can physically scale that light and it behaves differently than when it's small. When it's small, it behaves like a very hard light where we get hard edge shadows. When we make it bigger, the shadows become spread out automatically. It's designed to represent an area or surface of light. Now, we've got LED strips here in the ceiling. Before that, we used to have those recessed LED, or not LED, fluorescent light bulbs. I don't know if you guys remember them. Stuck in the ceiling, there were like 3 tubes and they would have a reflector. Again, area light could represent that whole setup. It could also represent our screen. Because if I were to just make that screen white and not have anything going on it, that would act like a reflector. So our projector up there would be like a spotlight that projects down onto the screen. Then our screen acts like an area light because it's a broad surface of light bringing light out into the environment. Could also use it for a window, a door, a big surface or area. That's why it's got the name area light. So I'm going to be doing a demo with a simple polyplane and a couple of spheres. If you guys want to follow along, I highly recommend it. We're also going to experiment with assigning the Arnold material to the surface, which you guys are going to need to do today. Now, in the first project, I had the lights all done. I had the Arnold material assigned to the objects in the scene, and you were all set to go. Today, you're going to get a bare bones scene that's got Lambert on it, and we're going to replace it with the Arnold material. I'm going to show you what settings you need to tweak, and then we'll get in and start lighting. We'll play around. First off, got to launch Maya, wait for Maya to load, and Arnold. Pull this down here. All right, so I'll do a quick demo of what the different lights do, how they behave, what makes them look unique. And then we'll get into what are the expectations for today. What are you guys actually going to do? All right, so Arnold's loaded. I'm not actually going to set my project, am I? Yeah, you know what? I probably should, just for good work habits. All right, so for today, let's see how that's doing. Oh, good, it finished processing. And there is lecture part 1. Awesome. It's uploaded. Lecture 2, part 1. All right, so the download we give you guys is Project 2 SAL Arnold. When you download that, you will get, let me expand this a little bit more. You will get 3 folders. Get a Maya project folder, templates, and reference images. So the Maya project folder is what you want to set your project to. There's a couple of scenes in there, all set to go. But we're not going to use any of those scenes. I'm just going to use a simple plane and sphere. So, but I'm still going to set my project just for good work practice. So SAL Arnold, there is my project folder. Yep, that's it. Going to go back, click on it once, hit set. And I'm just going to create a polyplane, make it fit the grid area, just scale it. Then I'm going to create a polysphere. And I don't want my polysphere sticking in the ground. So I'm going to translate it up 1 unit in Y. 1 unit will raise it so it sits on the surface. Right there. Now I'm going to duplicate it a couple more times. And I don't care about construction history because I'm not really going to do anything with it. Now you can see it's got a little faceting in there. I could always hit 3, which gives me that smooth approximation. And Arnold understands that when you hit the 3 key, it understands, hey, you want it to be smooth like Maya shows in the viewport, which is good because some renderers, you have to go and turn on a special switch so that when you hit the 3 key, it understands you want to have a smooth approximation. All right, now, if I look in the attributes for each of these surfaces, it has Lambert. Granted, Lambert is meant to look like a diffuse surface, but honestly, Lambert is substandard now. It's okay if you're doing stuff in Maya and you're not going anywhere else, but Arnold has its own material. That's kind of like the Swiss Army knife of materials. One material, you can build almost anything in the world that you can think of. Skin, concrete, plastic, hair, fur, glass, metal. It can pretty much do it all for the most part. And there are a few specialized materials. Car paint's a hard one because sometimes that's multi-layered, where you might have a base coat, you might have a fleck coat on top of metal coat, then you might have a clear coat on top of that. So it gives you some depth in the paint. But for the most part, our Arnold material will work. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to select all the objects in my scene. So the ground and the 3 spheres. I'm going to right click and go to Assign New Material. Or we have a shortcut that we can do, Shift-T. Shift-T will assign new material. It brings up the same window. Watch. Go down here. Oh, come on. Zoom is in the way again. All right, assign new material. There we go. So same thing. So Shift T or just right click, assign new material. Now you want to go down to Arnold right here. Arnold shader, doesn't really matter if you select the Arnold category. You want to go down to the AI standard surface. That is the surface we will be using all month. Click on it, and it will assign this base AI standard surface material to all the objects. How do I know? Well, if I click on each one individually, it'll show me AI standard surface. Life is good. Now, in the AI standard surface, doesn't matter which one you choose, there's one surface assigned to all the geometry. We're going to change a couple of things. First, we're going to change the color to be 50% gray. That's flat kind of base material color. So under base color, change the weight from 0.8 to 0.5. And under specular, you want to turn the specular weight off because we're not dealing with shiny objects. And by default, Arnold gives you a shiny object. Now, if I render this out, let me open up the render view here. And let's close that. I don't need that open. Take the weight, turn it to 0. Specular weight. So if I render this out, I get nothing. I've got 2 out of the 3 important things that I need. I've got surfaces, I've got a camera. What am I missing? Well, I'm missing light. Yes. So that's why I'm not seeing anything. So this is where we decide which light would you like me to demo first. Got directional, point, spot, AI area. Okay, we got 1 vote for area. Anybody else? Area. Okay, so, all right, good. Darian wants AI area too. So we're all in agreement. Everybody wants to see the cool kid first. All right, now, most of the Maya lights, or actually all the Maya lights, are under create. Create lights. To create an Arnold area light, you want to go under the Arnold shelf, and this icon all the way on the left will create an AI area light right here. That is your area light icon. Now it is confusing because a lot of these icons look alike. If you hover above it, it should tell you down here in the tool hint. And eventually, if you've got hints turned on, it should show you here. Maybe because I have this open, I don't know. Yeah, every once in a while, if I'm not, I think it has to do with me anyway. I've got it turned on and I'm screen sharing, and I've also using an external monitor. Oh, there it is. Now it decided. See, Maya hates people. Maya hates humans. So there is my area light. I click on it. Notice I've got color, intensity, exposure. Exposure, ignore. We are not using exposure at all. Now we've got a light. Let's see what that looks like when we render. So I got a little tiny piece of light here in the middle, and that's because my light is in geometry. So notice it almost disappears, for one thing, because my light is not pointed anywhere that I can see that it's going to hit. So this little pointer, or it almost looks like a surface normal, that is telling you the direction that the area light's broadcasting light. So in order to make it visible, I have to aim it at my geometry. So to do that, I'm just going to rotate it so it's pointing down. Now you'll also notice that, wow, that is really dark. Yes, the default intensity is laughable. So let's crank it up to 10. Wow, it's brighter. Like I said, don't be afraid of cranking it up. On this Arnold area light, I'll usually start like 100 or close to it, just so I can see it. So you can see that that area light does not illuminate anything behind it. So I'm just rotating an X right now. And you can see there's my shadows. They're fairly soft, right? You can see how the soft the edges are. So this light responds to scale. So if I scale this light, make it smaller, watch what happens to my shadows. They get sharper, they contract. When I scale it and make it bigger, they spread out, they get softer, they expand. So big light, soft shadows, small light, hard light, sharp shadows. Yes. And what's your intensity? Okay. Did you try and crank it up higher? I started at 100. Did you assign the AI standard material to all of the objects? Okay. And you've got IPR running. You have IPR running? Well, do you have a square or do you have an arrow? No, in the Arnold render view. You do have the Arnold render view open, right? Okay, so do you have a square or do you have an arrow here? Okay, that means it's not running. You got to click on it. There you go. So you missed lecture 1. That's what we went over. So when you go back and watch that, it'll make a lot more sense. I'm sorry. What did you say? Right. Were you able to get in today to Zoom? Okay, that's fine. That'll work out fine. Your Wi-Fi connection is your email name without the address part, without the @full-sail, and it's your password for the email. And you should be hooking up to FS Student. All right, but besides that, you know where the archives are for the lecture, right? Okay, good. So you can get that. All right, no problem. All right. So intensity, scaling the light will make the shadows softer or harder. Obviously, moving the light around is a big deal because it's going to change. Even if I don't aim it at the geometry, it's still going to illuminate it a little bit. So when I pull this and put the light sort of in the middle, you can see how the shadows kind of fan out. The object that the light is right underneath, the shadow is more or less stationary. Right? You can see the shadows of the spheres on either side of the center sphere fan outwards. And that's kind of how our light usually travels, like that. Okay, so a couple of things you need to know about the AI area light besides intensity is that you can make the light visible to the camera. Now, visibility to the camera means that the light actually needs to be pointed at the camera so you can see it. So, for example, to make the light visible, I can go down here to visibility and you can see camera is set at 0. So if I turn it all the way up, it should be visible. But the problem is my light's outside of the frame. It's all the way up above. So you bring this down, and you can see I still can't see it. All right, the reason is it's not angled so the camera can see it. Remember, it's broadcasting light straight down. If the light's going to be visible, I have to rotate it a little bit. And now you can see it. Does that make sense? So if you turn visibility on and your camera can't see the light, well, that's because the light's probably not aimed at the camera. It's like me having a flashlight and you want to see the flashlight, but I turn around and point it in the opposite direction. You're going to go, what? Now, visibility, we don't need that for most of what we're doing, but you guys get a reference where the light's visible in the scene. There's a way to make it visible. Now, while I've got visibility on, let me aim this a little bit more that way. There we go. So while I've got this visible, we can actually have different shapes of our AI area light. So down here, there's color, intensity, again, forget exposure. Light shape, it's set up to be quad, which is a square or a rectangle. So light shape, we can change it to be a disc. And now it's round. Doesn't really change how the light looks when I change it back to quad. Notice the property of the light still pretty much looks the same. It's just visible to the camera, the shape has changed. Now, there's also a cylinder. I really don't teach cylinder because it's kind of a weird shape to use. We don't have many cylindrical things in the real world that use lighting like that, other than fluorescent light tubes. But if you're going to do fluorescent lights, you're probably not going to do each individual tube. You're probably going to do the little plastic cover that's in front of them that looks like an area light and distributes light down. Also, if we need a special shape, when we get into environment lighting, we're going to be creating what are called mesh lights, which means we can take any piece of geometry and make it a light. So kind of having a tube or a cylinder light is nice, but notice it changes the property of the area light. Now, I can scale it, I can stretch it, I can make it do all kinds of things, but in the end, most of the time we wind up using an area light, a window, a door. And if I want to try and get our full sail round window in the door or kind of the oval shape in the wall, well, guess what? I'm going to use this. I'm going to turn it into a disc and then stretch it in one direction. If I can, let's see. Well, let me do that. Oh, okay. So apparently, it doesn't like being changed into anything other than a perfect circle. So for the quad, yeah, notice the quad, it doesn't matter. Now, if you ever want to reset your light to be the default, it's usually a scale of 1 in X, Y, and Z. And then you can always make it bigger or smaller. All right. For the most part, roundness of your light doesn't really change anything, not totally useful. Soft edges, it doesn't really change your shadows. Honestly, I'm only going to show you things that you're absolutely going to use most of the time. Once in a while, if there's a special feature I think you might need. For the most part, you guys can play around with this stuff, but it's not going to be really part of basic lighting. Basic lighting is light direction, light intensity, light color, shadow quality. So right now we've addressed light direction a little bit. So let me go and let me reset this. All right, so I put it back to 0, 0, 0, my rotation. And let's talk about, there's my camera position. Let's talk about my light direction. So notice my light is no longer visible to the camera because I turned it around. I'm going to turn visibility off. And let's just go with basic light directions. So for the most part, you've got what's called front light. That's where the light is sort of in the same position as the camera in front of the subject. The shadows are going to recede to the back. So now, if we have side light, our light's usually going to be on the side somewhere like this. Maybe not exactly side, but it might be some close. So the shadows kind of move toward the right, or if it's on the opposite side, toward the left. You can see what the shadows do. Okay, another kind of cardinal light position is backlight, when the light is behind the subject. So with the light behind the subject, the shadows come toward the camera. With front light, the shadows went away from the camera. So they do have different looks. And then if I take my light and position it directly overhead, top light, my light will usually sit under my subject. And in this case, if I've got more than one subject, it's going to fan out on the sides. Now, if you want to add color, color goes into the color part of the light. So Arnold area light attributes color. If I click on that little color swatch, if I plug in pure red, it's going to look very cartoony. Light color always saturates very quickly. You guys know what saturation is? Saturation is the dominance of the color. So usually for light, we desaturate the color usually to about 0.3 to 0.2, somewhere around there. So it's a lot more subtle. And then we can kind of play around with the hue, which is the actual color. So kind of move it. We can get into the blues. Now we're into cooler looking light. Get into the greens. It's still relatively cool. Get out of the greens into the yellows. Now we're warming up. We got warm light, a little bit of orange, a little bit of red. So just be careful with the level of saturation in your light color. Now, if you want to get it back to white, you can click in the color picker, choose white, or grab the slider, drag it left, drag it right. That'll get rid of the color, put it back to white. All right. Questions? Everybody good? How about out there in Zoom world? Anybody have any questions? All right, Nathaniel, got any questions? Marie, Kentavious, Joni, Jacer, Derek, Darian, Clifton, Angel. Everybody good? Okay. All right. So those are pretty much, for want of a better word, the highlights of the area light. All right, so what I'm going to do, I don't think I need that light. I'm just going to delete it. And when I delete it, you can see I got no light now. So let's pick another one. Directional point spot. So I got one vote for point. Point light. Point light. All right, so everybody here on campus wants point light. Everybody in Zoom, this is your chance. Guys are slow. Okay. So point light it is. So point light for this, it's not on the Arnold shelf. We have to go up to create lights down under Maya lights. We want the point light. Don't confuse it with the ambient light, which is Satan's own spawn. It's a terrible light. It was in the days before there was global illumination or bounce light. It was a big fake and it made everything look awful. Yeah, so no ambient light, please. And there's an area light here, but use the Arnold one. Volume light doesn't work, but point light does. So create a point light, just like anything Maya, it's going to drop in at the center of the world. So if I pull it up out of the ground, again, it is going to be anemic. Now, here's something about the Maya lights you need to know. It says here there's a decay rate. That decay rate does not work. The light, since we're using Arnold as the renderer, is being controlled mostly by the Arnold controls down here. So most of the lights that Arnold has are equivalent to real world lights. That means they've got decay built into them already. They're meant to behave like that. The only thing we really use up here in the light is going to be intensity and color. That's it. And then the rest we're going down to Arnold. Now, just like with the area light, that point light needs some energy. So like I said, I mean, one of my favorites is 100. It doesn't work all the time, but it'll get my scene illuminated. Now notice this shines everywhere. So I don't have an area that's not being illuminated. It's an omnidirectional light. By default, look at my shadows. They are razor sharp. Now, if I scale this light, it doesn't even want to scale. That's because it's meant to be an infinitely small point of light in space. So, how do we make soft shadows with a point of light? You know, that's like having a pin be a light. It's going to shine everywhere and it's going to be super hard because it's really small. Even when I move it physically close to my objects, my shadows, you know, change shape because the light's getting closer, but they're still razor sharp. Now, down here in the Arnold attributes, we have something called radius. Radius is designed to make the light behave like a bigger light. Right now, the radius is 0, infinitely small. As I increase it, watch what happens to my shadows. They start to get softer. So, how soft do you need your shadows? It's going to be based on your reference. And how do you make the shadows softer? You use the radius control. Yes. Oh, okay. I'm glad you noticed that. Here's what's going on behind the scenes, right? In our viewport, it just looks like, okay, yeah, no, nothing's going on. What's going on? The light itself physically looks the same. Watch this. Watch when I turn on visibility. So now it's visible to the camera. It's got no radius, so the camera can't see it. But as soon as I give it a little bit of radius, this is what's going on behind the viewport. So it actually is getting bigger, but the icon is not getting bigger. So when it turned completely wacky like that, my light went into the geometry and was being occluded or hidden by that big light that was there. So while the icon does not get bigger, when you change the radius control behind the scenes, it does physically get bigger. Now, most of the time, unless your reference says, hey, I need a big ball of light, you're not going to have visibility on. But if you're playing around with it and all of a sudden this happens, and it's like, oh my God, it's an eclipse, it's the end of the world. No, it's probably that you've made your light big and go into the geometry. So, good catch, Chanel. Glad you saw that. So, this one, rotation doesn't really matter. It's an omnidirectional light. You rotate it, it's still going to broadcast light in all directions. So for this, translation is really the key. There's your light direction. Make sense? Now, so color, intensity, radius is important. If you've got issues with radius, or it looks like something weird is happening, turn the visibility on so you can see where the light is and how big it is. But just remember, turn it off so it's not in frame when you go to render. Right, forget exposure. And pretty much everything else is the same. The color works the same way. So I can come in here and I can go, let's have green. Oh, no, that's disgusting. Well, don't forget to desaturate your light. Oversaturated light, very stylized, very cartoony, not really occurring in nature that much. Like we talked a little bit about the lights in this room kind of feeling warm. Well, it's very subtle. It's not like they're blatantly yellow or orange or red. It feels just a little more, it's meant to, I'm assuming, to look a little more like natural light, like sunlight, sort of, at a golden hour kind of time of the day. Some people associate natural light with it being really white, but that tends to be cool, tends to be a little harder on the eyes too. All right, so you need color, you add color into the color attribute. And again, you want to break color and you go, oh, wait, there's no color in my reference. We'll just break the connection. All right, area light, or sorry, spotlight or directional. All right, so Joni says spot. We got a consensus pretty much here on campus of spot. So spot is what we'll do. So for the spotlight, that is a Maya light. Let's go create lights, spotlight. Let's render. Let's pull it up out of the ground. And let's give it some intensity. Now, it's not being aimed at my objects here. Now, for this light, I can rotate it. And there's my cone. It's round. That cone is controlled with the cone angle. Cone angle basically makes that spotlight circle bigger, consequently making the area that it illuminates bigger. Once I crank it all the way up, it behaves like a flat light. It's almost like a disc light. Now, notice that my shadows are super hard and the edge of my light is super hard. The edge of my light, that's called the penumbra angle. Now, the penumbra can be softened. The edge of that cone, I can soften it outwards by dragging the slider to the right. Tends to make it softer going out. Or if I drag it in the opposite direction, go negative, it contracts my cone and makes it softer. The cone is still physically out here. It's just that the edge has softened inward. Now, if anybody's ever watched like a comedian on stage, a lot of times they'll have a spotlight follow them around and they will have a very hard cone edge, just to make sure it's well defined where the actor is or the comedian. Now, one of the things about the spotlight is it has the ability to use what's called the interactive manipulator. Interactive manipulator is basically a little control that gives us a center of interest that the light will follow around. And to do that, we can hit the T key, T for tango. So with my light selected, if I hit T, it gives me that little center of interest. And now I can move that around and the light will follow it. It's actually quite nice for aiming the light when you want the light to be in a location. Now, I can also use it as the center of interest for the light to orbit around. So now, if I move this around, the light's just going to orbit around that center of interest. So you have a choice of moving one or the other. It's sometimes a little more convenient than just doing translate and then you rotate it and then you translate it again and then you rotate it again. So T key, to get rid of it, just hit W, E, or R. Just to get out of it. Now, under Arnold, so far, we've adjusted the cone angle and the penumbra, make that edge of the cone very soft. We also have one other control called drop-off. Drop-off behaves like an actual spotlight or car headlight, where the bulb or the reflector has the brightest point of it in the center, and it gradually gets less intense toward the edges. And that's basically what drop-off will do. So, and drop-off is very sensitive. Just me like kind of nudging it, you can see that it keeps the center bright right here. So let me just type some numbers in. There's 1. So you can see it's bright here in the center, gradually gets less intense toward the edges. If I go to 2, still bright in the center, less intense toward the edges. So think of it like a center of interest control. Keep it bright in the center, but it will gradually fall off or drop off, decay on the sides. Now, principles of light all apply to all these lights. With the spotlight, we're adding in a couple of more settings. So when you're dealing with a spotlight, we still have light direction, light intensity, light color, shadow quality. If it's a spotlight, if you've got your light direction and your shadows match, then all you have to do is adjust the cone angle. That's how much area is illuminated. Does the cone or edge of that spotlight, is it soft? So cone softness or penumbra angle. And then, is there any drop off? So when you analyze lights, most of the time you're going to be analyzing them with the principles of light in mind. Where's the direction? How bright is it? What's the color? How are my shadows? When you actually have an image with a spotlight, and let's pull one up here. All right, so lighting exercises we have today for you guys are area light. You're going to use the Arnold area light. Pick one of these two scenes, whichever one you want to do. You're going to match the light direction, the light intensity, the light color, the shadow quality. This one is top light. This one is front light. Now, whichever one you choose to do, for the next exercise, you will do the opposite. So for example, the Maya directional light, you've got a choice of front and top. If you choose to do the top here, you need to do the front here. If you choose to do the front in the area, you can do the top in the directional light. Does that make sense? So, light direction, light intensity, light color, shadow quality, right? Same thing here, point light, side or back, whichever one you want to do. If you do the side here, for the spotlight, you need to do the back. If you do the back here, for the spotlight, you need to do the side. Now, these top three are basic lights with no special characteristics. But down here with the spotlight, we've got a cone angle here. So most people kind of freak out when they see this because they go, but there's so much else going on besides just light direction, light intensity, light color, and my shadows. I got this cone angle. The edges of the cone are soft, and it's bright in the middle, but not bright on the edges. That's right. You still do the principles of light. You still want light direction, side light. Get your shadows to match. Forget the cone. Put that out of your mind. Shadows only. Intensity. How bright is it? Color. Any color here? It looks pretty neutral. How about over here? It looks a little warm. Shadow quality. All right, my shadows are not super soft. They do have a little bit of softness in them, but they're not razor sharp, but they're not super soft either. That would be the radius or size of the light. Now, for the spotlight, just like with our point light, remember we had that little radius control that made the light get bigger behind the scenes. We still have a radius control for this. Once you're done with light direction, light intensity, light color, shadow quality, then you go, how big is my cone? Right? Well, my cone, if my shadows are positioned correctly, that means my light is in the right place. And then I just adjust the cone angle. So you want the cone angle basically to be like right about back here. And it looks like it gets softer going inward. So I adjust my penumbra angle. Looks like I might want to go negative, so it goes inwards. So cone angle, how big of an area, cone softness, and then does it look like it's brighter in the middle and less intense toward the edges? How about over here too? Bright in the middle, less intense toward the edges? Then that would be drop off. And drop off is super, super sensitive. Let me get my annotation. There's annotation. Okay. So let's get our light here. So penumbra, looks like I want to soften it inward. Drop off. Just remember, if you nudge it, it's too much. Just go back, start like 0.5, 1, 1.5, because that slider will drive you crazy. Most of the time, you won't see me use sliders that much because I hate them. They're just like arbitrary. I like to be more precise and go, okay, well, I either want it twice what was there or half what was there. And I'll just cut it down. Now, to get the shadows to be soft, that is down here under Arnold. And we've got the radius control, just like we did with the point light. Now notice I made it gigantic and it didn't go through. Visibility's on. Why can't I see it? Well, let's lower it more. Because unfortunately, with the spotlight, you really can't make it visible to the camera. Why? I don't know. You would think you could, but you can't. So point light you can, area light you can, spotlight, no. Why, Arnold? Why? But we live with the limitations. If you need a round shape, why not use an area light? You might be able to go use the Arnold area light, use the round shape. But if it happens to be a round shape, and also you can see the cone angle, you're out of luck. All right, so radius, how soft are the shadows? All right, don't bother messing with shadow density. That is artificial. Well, my shadows are too dark. Well, when we have more than one light in there, you will get bounce light. You will get things that will make your shadows not as dark. So that's a bad habit to get into, because then your stuff starts to look really weird. Some lights have shadows that are really dark. Others have shadows that are not dark enough. You know, you start second guessing everything. Just leave them at 1. All right, does that make sense? Questions? Questions about the spot? All right, Nathaniel's good. All right, last one we have is the directional light. Directional light is our sun. So I'm going to delete that. Let's create a new Maya light, directional. Let's kick off the render. And you'll see that, wait, why is it doing that? It's illuminating the first sphere over here, but it's embedded in the geometry in the center sphere. Why does it look like that? Well, this light is meant to look like the sun, which means it's meant to look like it's infinite, meaning it's a wall of light in whatever direction those arrows are pointing. So I can translate this anywhere I want. It's not going to change. Right? It's a wall of light, no matter where I move it. The thing this is all of, or I should say, what makes this really unique is, like the sun, it's all about the angle or rotation. Scaling this icon does absolutely nothing other than make a hilariously large or really, really small icon. Depends on what you want to work with. Like, is your scene gigantic and this is a tiny little light that looks ridiculous? Make it bigger so you can work with it. This is all about the rotation. So as soon as I start to rotate that light, more of those parallel light rays start to hit the ground. So by the time the light is directly overhead, it's pretty bright. Now, the intensity of 1, it's okay. I mean, honestly, like Pixar's Render Man, their directional light is 50,000. Maya's at 1 is, I guess, 1 for the sun. I don't know. I don't know how they do it. But 1 is okay. A lot of times you probably have to crank it up, maybe to 1.5 or 2, depending on how much brighter you want your scene. What does the reference look like? As you start to make it brighter, it's going to start to wash out your scene. What's that? Oh, yeah, put it to 100. Yeah, that's always fun. Then it's a polar bear in a snowstorm. There you go, yeah. That looks more like ambient occlusion than it does actual lighting. Yeah, so when I said most of my lights I turn up all the way, this is the one exception. All right, so there are Arnold attributes for it. By default, this light will have razor sharp shadows. Now, change the color of it just like all the other lights. You know, you can come in here, give it a little color. Or if I want to make it look like, you know, nighttime, maybe moonish. Although technically nighttime is a little warmer than we think. But cool light. Now, to get the shadows, that is called angle. The reason it's not called radius is because the sun is the sun in our sky. It doesn't really get any bigger or any smaller. So we always have the same kinds of shadows. It's all about what is the angle of the sun or where is it in the sky. When the shadows from the sun come right underneath of us, the light is directly overhead, those light rays are going to give us pretty much hard edge shadows. As the sun shadows start to get longer, the sun is getting lower in the sky, they get a little softer. Now, a good, I would say, a good angle to set your sun shadows at is 0.5. That will give you slightly soft shadows, but not razor hard shadows. That's pretty accurate with the way our sun behaves. So you can see as they get a little longer, they get a little bit softer, but not a lot softer at 0.5. So when you create the sun or the directional light, set your angle at 0.5 as a good starting point. If your reference shadows look a little softer, bump it up a little. If they look a little harder, bump it down. But 0.5 is usually pretty accurate. Most other renderers use 0.5 as a reference for the sun shadow softness. Because sun shadows, people think of them as being softer than they really are. It's not until like really evening around 6:30, 7 o'clock when the sun's really low, the shadows are super long, that they're going to start to soften up. Does that make sense? All right, so those are pretty much the controls you need to use for today's exercise. So, as we talked about, let me go and bring this up. We've got 4 exercises for you. The first 3 the area light, the directional light, the point light use the same scene file. I have a separate spotlight scene file for you guys because I got bored, and just something different to have. So you're going to do the basic light directions: front, top, side, back. Each light must have a different direction. Can't repeat the same direction in different lights. So you have some freedom, some creative choice. You're matching light direction, light intensity, light color. So if you see warm, make it warm. If you see cool, make it cool. Warm, cool, you know, whatever you think you see there. I'm going to show you later on how to actually sample colors from an image. But for this, I just want you guys to practice just trying to eyeball it. Make sense? Now, in addition to those four, you guys will have a chance to create your own composition. Much like Project 1, you're going to go on the internet, look for a reference. Your reference needs to have something that looks like it can be done with a single light, because you're only allowed to use one light. There's part of the restraint. The other is you have to use one of our scenes. No modeling, but this time you guys are responsible for the lighting. So find an image that inspires you. Film noir is usually a pretty good place to start. So if you go on the internet, type in film noir, you'll get a ton of images. So you look at this one, I see backlight. It's behind the subject. The light's being blocked by the subject. So here, this is sort of backlight because the character's in silhouette, has multiple lights, but you could get away with one light behind the subject. Again, this is kind of that famous scene from John Alton movie. Again, this could be single light source. Don't worry about the light pattern in front of the character. We're not interested in the light passing through a screen, or in Hollywood or photography, they call it a gobo or a cookie. They put basically a piece of metal or a shape in front of it so the light passes through it, so you get that look. Be like us taking light, putting it through the backs of the chairs. You'd get that screened look. It's great, it's nice, but we're just worried about basic light direction and trying to match an image that you found. So there are tons. Look, pretty blatant spotlight. Now, you're going to use our geometry. So just make the geometry into the look and feel of your subject. Get the basic shape of it. Put a couple pieces together, scale them, whatever you need to do. Does that kind of make sense? All right, so let me show you a couple examples of what students have done with Project 2. So again, pretty simple. This one captures that whole, hey, they look like parallel shadows. So sun. This one, spotlight, got it on the ground here. Pretty hard shadow, measured it pretty good. They got, front of the character's nose in that spotlight. We don't condone smoking, but hey, film noir, man, everybody smoked. Everybody drank. Everybody did counterfeiting, according to them, and drugs and whatever. It's, we don't condone it, but it is part of our art. Okay, backlight, that's what I see here. This one's a really good backlight, and they were able to use a single light source, but yet get a foreground, a midground, and a background in it. So it's actually fairly clever. And they got the light direction. We don't have these God rays, but they got the light direction here kind of coming from above off to the side just a little bit. They got the light color in there. So this one, I would have chosen just like a single subject, maybe a couple other objects around it, just to simplify it. Here, stacked a bunch of the little pieces of our woodblock scenes, put them together, made a stairwell. We've got, very simple shape, but they kind of got the right light angle, and they also got the shadow quality of it. Backlight, the one thing I would say about this is you could be a lot brighter in the back there. But you get the idea. All right, I'm going to try and wrap this up for you guys. When you go to work on your project, you want to bring your reference into Arnold, just like I showed you guys for project 1. Right? So let me pull up. I'm going to do the directional light one real quick. So here's the scene. Don't forget, when you open it up, you're going to need to select everything, all the geometry, and make it. You're going to assign new material, which is Shift T. Arnold AI standard. You want the color, the value to be 0.5. And we want to have the the specular weight turned off, so it's not shining. So in the Arnold, it says warning, it's not opening Arnold. Make sure when you open the scene that Arnold is set as your renderer. So some evil person made Maya software the renderer. So make sure you change it to Arnold. Then you should be able to bring up the Arnold render view. Now, might need to save it first. Let's save it. Let's do a new scene. Let's open this up. What? I don't care about Bifrost. Let me open this one again. Do that. Let's change it over to Arnold. Right there. Let's close it. Let's save it. Replace it. Select all the geometry and assign the Arnold AI standard surface. Turn off spec. All right. So this worked the other day. I might need to restart Maya. All right, let me do this. Since we got somebody coming in behind us, What I want to do is, let me open up the other scene, see if that'll work. Okay, Arnold. Nope, that one's not working either. If I do a new scene, I do this. Wait a minute, what's going on here? All right, I know what I'm going to do. Let me troubleshoot this while you guys go to lunch. And then when you come back to lab online, remember lab is virtual. We have another class coming in. What I'm going to do is I'll research it and I'll come back into lab and demo for you guys real quick. Okay? So rather than kind of have them get all stressed out because they have to be in here and have us try to wrap it up too quickly, I'll see you guys. Come back at, let's see. Come back at 1:55 to lab. Okay, online. All right, I'm going to stop recording.